Hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a voiceover on all the Duramax information. So starting out, we're going to start out with the LB7, which was from 2001 to 2004 and a half, I guess you could say. The 01 to 02 got no EGR. The 3 to 4 had EGR if it was California emissions. So let's start off with the most common issue that is obvious. The fuel injectors. Those are a big major problem on these trucks. The only way that I've found about making them better is putting the lift pump on and then putting brand new Bosch injectors in there or some sort of brand new high quality injectors. That usually takes care of the issue for quite a long time. Generally the GM remanufactured ones are junk. Those ones you get maybe 100, maybe 80,000 out of max. But you put a good set in there, good fuel system, lift pump, doesn't matter the brand, but you want filtration, makes it a good truck. The next thing I see a lot of problems with is head gaskets. Now, a lot of people like to tune these trucks up, make a lot of horsepower, which is all good. They can handle it, just the heads like to pop off. But it's kind of hit and miss with the head gaskets. Really good running trucks, just that is an issue on these as well. The next thing that I notice, if it does have EGR on it, the EGR system does seem to have issues. These are kind of a weird, complicated system. It has a vacuum pump, a mechanical vacuum pump that's driven off the belt, and everything's vacuum operated. The vacuum pumps tend to go bad. The solenoids tend to go bad. There's one solenoid that intermittently will act up and create havoc. Trying to diagnose it. But it's not too complicated. It's just kind of stupid. But overall, they're really stout engines. Turbochargers are extremely reliable. Obviously has a CP3. They're really, really good engines. Just the injectors and the head gaskets. Once you stud it, put a new set of injectors in there and throw a lift pump on it. Very, very powerful, torquey engine. So next up is the LLY. This engine was produced in these Duramaxes from 2004 and a half to 2005 and a half, roughly somewhere around there. I think it was actually 05 as the end, but somewhere around there. The biggest problem that I see with these trucks is head gasket issues. I don't know why. Generally about 200,000 to 300,000 is when they pop, but I've seen them as high as 500,000-600,000 miles with no issues. So it's just a crapshoot. Doesn't really depend on how hard it's driven. From what I can tell, it's just luck, unfortunately. So that is definitely, it is a major job to do. I do have a video on that if you want to check that out. I'll post a card at the top. So with that, the next thing that I do see a lot of issues with is the wiring on the engine, specifically the injector wiring that runs the injectors. These trucks like to go in this thing called tractor mode. So what it'll do is it'll actually kill 4 injectors when one injector acts up or it has a short on something on one of that bank. It'll actually kill 4 injectors running tractor mode. Very, very sluggish, but it'll get you home, The other thing that also happens with that is number 2 and number 7 injector pigtails. For some reason likes to burn number 2 and number 7. GM actually has an updated pigtail for it for 2 and 7 to keep them from doing that. So, that's something also to look for. The next thing that I do notice on these trucks, they do again have some type of EGR issue. The valves over time, electronically, they either, I don't know if it's in electronics or if the valve itself hangs up. I've seen it quite a few times where the valve will hang up when you come to a stop when it goes to test it. Because what happens when these trucks warm up, the EGR is not working until the engine warms up a little bit. When you come to a stop, it'll actually open the valve and then close it to test it. And when it opens that valve, it can't close it, so it gets stuck open. You go to accelerate and nothing happens. That's the most common problem I see on these. Unfortunately, the valves are a little bit expensive if you get them from GM, but it's not a major issue. It's kind of a scary issue. So they're good engines, just some stupid little issues. Again, this one has a lot more reliable injectors than the LB7. These injectors, I think I've maybe seen 1 or 2 go bad, and it's usually the electrical side because people will continue to drive it with the pigtail bad, and ends up burning the actual pin on the electrical connector. So by that point, we have to put an injector in it and change a pigtail. But overall, really good engine. I personally have one. Beat the living death out of it. It's studded and all the good stuff. Once you stud these Duramaxes, they're generally very reliable. But it all depends on how you take care of it and baby it. But the LLY is a really good engine. It's a little underpowered for what it is. The other thing that does happen to them is They do tend to overheat sometimes when you're towing, and the reason behind that is this has a variable geometric turbocharger, and they really didn't uprate the cooling system to handle all the emissions that ran through the EGR. So it's putting a lot of heat in that engine, especially in the exhaust system from the EGR cooler, and it just can't shed that heat. So sometimes some people do report it that they do have overheating issues. I've really never seen it. On mine, I push mine really hard, so I notice it has that tendency, but I'm pushing it really, really hard, so I don't know if that's me or if that's the truck. But the overheating is kind of an issue, and they're just kind of doggy engines. They don't really make much power. You can tune them up and make power, but you know, it's nothing like an LBZ, and that's the next one we're going to talk about. But overall, a really good engine, kind of an underdog, but it's a good engine overall. You know, just stud it, take care of it, and she'll treat you right. The other thing that I should add in this LLY saga is that the LLY does have two other issues. That's actually starting to crop up now, and it is a little bit of an issue. So the first problem is the fuel injection control modules. Those are starting to fail at a rapid rate. Unfortunately, they're no longer produced new, so you have to buy remanufactured ones or have yours rebuilt if you can. And some used ones, they can range anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, and you know, you can get yours rebuilt generally for $250, $300. I had mine rebuilt on my truck just so that it's good. There's two capacitors. I shouldn't say there's two, but there's capacitors inside the FICM that can leak over time, and it'll actually burn the board up. And then at that point, you're having to buy a whole new FICM versus just having yours rebuilt. So you definitely want to catch it early on before you get to that point. But you know, that's something you've got to keep in mind as well. Especially as these trucks are starting to age. The last few years I've started to see it become an issue. And then the next thing that's kind of a pain, the glow plug control modules. Those are starting to fail at really, really rapid rates, and the problem is, again, no longer produced. No longer you're able to source a quality part. I have a truck, I put 3 of them on from Napa. That's all I can get, and we're just continuously dealing with it as the time goes on. They're just junk. So keep that in mind. It's a very common failure point on these trucks, but you know, especially as they age, they're just starting to go bad. But keep that in mind if you are looking for one as well. That and the FICM are a pretty big deal, and then also the head gaskets. So next up we have the LBZ, which was kind of, I believe it was produced from 05.5, 06 to 07.5. 07.5 you actually could get the LBZ in the new body style. But the one thing you want to be careful of is around 05, they called it an LLY, but it was actually an LBZ. It looks like an LBZ, but it's just detuned like an LLY. So, just food for thought. But definitely the LBZ is one of the most renowned Duramax engines. It's kind of like the 7.3 of the Fords, but the LBZ, it has very good power, extremely reliable. It generally doesn't suffer from all the other issues that the older Duramaxes suffered from, like injectors and, you know, like the pigtails on the LY. It does have head gasket issues still, unfortunately. And I believe it does use different head gaskets. It uses a different, different layers of it or something like that. It isn't updated versus like the LY or LBZ. Not the LBZ, but the LB7. But it still does have problems. I don't know if it's just people pumping them up, but it's still an issue on those trucks, unfortunately, and it's going to be a common theme throughout this whole video. But still very, very good trucks. And I forgot to announce the elephant in the room, but as you can see, the video playing is not of a Duramax. It's actually from a Ford. I don't have any videos relating to the LBZ or LMM, so this is going to be the viewing for the next little bit until I have something that's relevant to what I'm talking about. But back on the LBZ, very good engine, extremely reliable. Again, head gasket issues. It's kind of a common thing, unfortunately. But once you do the head gaskets, it's a very, very good engine, very powerful. The other thing that it does suffer from, again, which is kind of like the LLY, it uses the same style EGR system. EGR valves like to hang up on them too, but really not that big of a deal. It's not as common, but it's still something to note that I do see quite often. But still definitely one of my favorite Duramax engines of all time. Extremely reliable, very powerful, It doesn't have all the emissions crap that the other trucks have on them. There's no DPF. All it does is has a EGR and a catalyst. That's it. So LBZ, very good engine. So the next one we're going to start talking about is the LMM. And the LMM is actually based on the LBZ. It's just based with emissions. So the the LMM is a very good engine. It does have a DPF and obviously EGR, typical stuff. The LMM, for what it is actually a very, very reliable engine. Again, even with the emissions equipment that it has on it, I rarely see them at all. I see them with 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 miles, no problems. They do suffer again, same thing as the LBZ, because it is a very similar engine, if not the same. Head gaskets. Head gaskets, I do see some issues with those. I've done a couple sets of heads on them. But, you know, surprisingly, with all the emissions equipment that it has on, it's actually a very reliable engine. And there's really not anything to balk about on them. You know, they do have, again, EGR issues. It's very, very rare, but I still see it a little bit. Because, again, it shares the same thing as the EGR on the LBZ and the LY. And I know I didn't say it, but the LMM is actually from 2007 and a half to, I believe, 2010. And then they went to the newer engine in 2011. But the other thing that's quite common on the LMM for some weird reason is they do break crankshafts. And the only time I've ever seen this is when the trucks are tuned heavily and they're cranked up really, really hard. And again, people really don't care. They beat the crap out of these trucks. They tune them, delete them, do whatever you got to do. But, you know, that is a problem. And broken cranks on Duramax is kind of a common issue, but that's if you put a lot of power through it and you don't kind of watch what you're doing. So keep that in mind if you are looking for something like that. I would not steer you away from an LMM, but I would rather have a LBZ just so you don't have to deal with the DPF and that kind of stuff. Again, the LMM does not take diesel exhaust fluid. That doesn't start till the next model year. So up next on the chopping block is the Duramax LML. I believe they do a LGH engine, which is similarly, it's pretty much the same engine that I can tell. It's just the one that's in the cabin chassis. Not sure of the differences. I've worked on them both. Don't really know the differences. They both look identical to me, but that's just so you know. They produced this engine from 2011 to 2016. This is the one that does have the CP4 pump that does fail. That is one of the major issues I see with these trucks. And people like to claim it's just a GM issue. It's definitely not. Anything that has them, they're garbage. So keep that in mind. In the video you see I am installing a extra G fuel metering valve. And what this does is actually keeps the metal in the pump and in the tank, so it does not spread it to the injectors and the rails. So if you do have one of these trucks, I highly suggest it if you don't want to do a CP3 conversion, if you're saving up for it. I think that metering valve is $300. Very easy to install. This video will actually show you how to do it, so if you're interested, go back. I'll try to post a card up there so you can see the video, how to do it. Very, very simple. But again, fuel system, very common issue. I have heard people talk about head gasket issues. I've personally never seen a blown head gasket on a LML. Never. I've had people tell me that they have. I've never seen it in person. Unfortunately, if I don't see it, I can't call it, you know, so that's nothing I've ever seen since I've been working on these since they came out. The other thing that is definitely an issue is the emissions equipment. The emissions equipment is a nightmare on this truck. As much as I prefer Duramax, it's just a nightmare. You have the NOx sensors, you know, with the DEF system. DEF system's just kind of a pain in the butt. It's mostly the reservoir inside the tank or the heater or the sending unit, whatever you want to call it. That goes bad. The injectors will plug up. The DEF injector will plug up. The NOx sensors will go bad. And one of the most common things I see is the ninth injector actually will plug up. At the head of it will plug up, and then it'll cause havoc down the stream. So that's another thing. I have done a couple of the EGR bypass valves. That is an absolute nightmare to do. You have to take the whole EGR cooler stack out, completely disassemble it, and then replace it, and then throw it back in. It's an all-day job. It's not fun, but it is what it is. But overall, it's actually a very reliable engine besides the fuel system and the emissions. I I don't really have too many issues with those. Just basically it's all emission stuff and the fuel pump. So fuel pump, you could either go, like I said, CP3, which I probably would suggest so you don't have to deal with it, or you can put the extra G valve in there, but that one day you're going to use the truck, it's going to break down, but hopefully it contains it all in the pump. I've had 2 of these pumps fail with those valves in there, and all I did is put a new pump in, flush everything out, new fuel filter, drop the tank, clean it out, and both of them have been perfectly fine. I see them drive by every couple days, so it is something that does work. So next up is the L5P, which was produced from 17 to 21 sometime. I think they changed the name of it now and they redesigned it. I don't see too many of these trucks, to be honest, so I'm not exactly sure. I have worked on quite a few of them, but overall, they're actually quite good trucks. I don't see anything majorly wrong with them. They seem to do a lot better than, obviously, the LML. The nice thing about the Duramax is, in 17, when they switched to the L5P, they changed the fuel system. They don't no longer use a Bosch with the CP4. They use a Denso system. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen one fail. They seem to be quite reliable. So, that's definitely an improvement on these trucks. Engines, they're extremely powerful. And by extremely, I mean they're quite powerful. I've driven them with, 10-foot cabin chassis trucks, and they just scream. They run really, really good. They do have a couple issues, though, that I've seen so far. Nothing crazy, but some annoyances. The one thing that is kind of a pain in the butt is the injector pigtails. Sometimes they'll go out. And what's kind of funny, we're going back to the LLY time, because the LLY obviously had the issue on 2 and 7. The L5P, same issue, but it happens on any cylinder. So you'll get an injector circuit code. This truck, I don't think it'll put into limp mode. I've never seen one do that. Like where it'll go in, like I was saying earlier, tractor mode. It'll just disable that one cylinder. But it's quite a simple repair, but it's very annoying. Say if you're towing or something like that, it starts missing. It's not something you want to drive on. You pull over, shut it down, start it back up. Hopefully you can limp it home without having any issues. But definitely an annoyance. But it's not a crazy big deal. Obviously you can see this video, we're doing a knock sensor on these trucks. This is another problem on these trucks. Again, emissions. But that seems to be about it. Besides, the other annoyance thing that I do see common on these trucks is the coolant reservoir. There's a float inside the tank that likes to stick. And I've done a lot of these tanks on every truck I think I've worked on. L5P, I've had to change a coolant reservoir on, because the float will get stuck, hang all the way at the bottom, and the truck says low coolant when it's full. Not really a big deal, but it's just an annoyance. But overall, they seem like very, very good trucks so far. I did have one truck that did have an emissions problem. It actually needed a cat, and I'm not too sure what this truck's problem was, but it happened very early on, so I think it was something to do with the customer. I don't know if it was the way that the truck was driven, or if it had some modification that he didn't tell me about, or maybe they had some type of fuel contamination, but it had a bad diesel oxide catalyst, the one behind the turbocharger. It just wasn't getting hot enough. That was about the most severe thing I've seen on one of these trucks to date. But overall, they seem pretty good. The newer ones I can't speak too much of. Like I said, I think the newest one I've really gotten into was a 19. I just did a video on a 2020 to do glow plugs, and that was an absolute disaster. Just horrible, horrible engineering. Very, very tight. Did not enjoy that whatsoever. But out of all of them, I think if I had to purchase a truck, I'd probably purchase an L5P. And the only reason I say that is because you get the power. It's very nice to have the power. And I know I didn't talk anything about transmissions, but you get this still has a 6-speed in it. Up until, I don't know what year, but somewhere around this time they switched over to the 10-speed. And that 10-speed I don't personally prefer, because it's not a real Allison transmission, not like the 5 and the 6-speed. So I'd rather have the 6-speed. It's extremely reliable transmissions, but I'd rather have one of those. You get the power, the reliability, the efficiency. I'd much rather have an L5P. It just sucks. The trucks are very expensive compared to all the other ones, but depending on your price point, it's definitely a truck to look at, and just take care of it. It'll last you hopefully a while, but only time will tell. And I just want to say, I do personally prefer Duramax. I find them to be more reliable mechanically than any of the other brands. I see a lot less engine failures in the Duramaxes than I do of any other one. But I still will be, I won't be biased on this decision just because of the fact that everybody builds junk. Everything's going to have problems. It's just what I see. The Duramaxes, the engines don't seem to have as many catastrophic failures as anybody else. And from my experience, that's what I see at work. We do a lot more engines in other trucks than the Duramaxes, and I don't know why, but that's just how I see it. But keep that in mind. I'm not biased towards them. I prefer them, but if it's junk, I'll tell you it's junk. Like the LB7, they're great engines, don't get me wrong. Head gaskets, injectors, that kind of stuff. I will never own one. I despise them, but they're good engines. They have really good low power. They sound really good. I just don't like them. I will never own one, but that's just my opinion, you know. Hopefully today you learned something, and if you did, please comment down below if I helped you out or if I missed anything, which I'm sure I did. There are a lot of other common failures, but they're not as severe as all the stuff that I listed, you know, like water pumps and stuff like that. I know those are a common problem, but they're not, you know, it's not a very common problem. You know, every now and then you'll get one, but it is what it is. So if it did help you out, please comment down below if it helped you out, or leave a comment, and please like and subscribe for me. I really appreciate it. Thank you and have a great day.